and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush. Some monumental feats on this week's Open Air. I'm pretty certain this is the earliest we've ever recorded, and it's due to you being in the Eastern time zone. But how are you doing?
God, these hours shouldn't exist, Devang. 10 a.m. on the East Coast. Can't do it. I'm doing all right, though, thank you. I'm adjusting to country life here in Canada's biggest province. Is it Canada's biggest province? Sure, let's go with that. And it's wonderful. I'm enjoying it so far.
I won't fact check you on that, but by population size, I think it is. So we're good to go. You're a bit outside Toronto enjoying the beautiful rustic part of Ontario. Is that fair to say?
Yes, indeed so. The mosquitoes are still eating me, despite the fact that I'm reassured by everyone that this is not as bad as they were 2 months ago. So that's always a positive.
Small victories. A lot to get to in this major edition of the podcast. The US Open well underway. We'll get to the results of our fantasy draft and some of the players we didn't pick to see how they fared and to see if we were vindicated with our hubris and our decision to not select some of the leading lights on the tour. Plus, as always, it's parting shots and 2 challenges remaining. But Simon, we begin where we always begin, it seems, the last few weeks. Serena Williams ending her career probably in pretty emotional fashion at the US Open in the third round, Simon. We got to get to all of these several angles to this week because I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of the broadcast and what the tournament did and just the general reaction from Serena's peers themselves. But I'm wondering where your head was at last Friday night watching the end of a pretty historic career.
It was slightly bittersweet, I would say, in watching the closing stages of it, because it kind of, I've discussed in this podcast before the idea that I've long considered Serena Williams retired, and this is somewhat of a farewell tour for her. So to see her fight and to see her have really the level of success that she did have on court and beating the second seed Annette Kontaveit in the second round and continuing to fight against a very, very good player in Ajla Tomljanovic to the end, even despite everything that happened in that match. I think I found myself wanting just a little more. And I think that's probably the best possible scenario for this farewell tour, which is that we got the fight, we got the energy, we got everything we wanted to. We saw glimpses of the player that Serena Williams was. But I think at the end, you just kind of saw it a little bit, right? That she just didn't quite have enough anymore to get over the line. And this kind of does feel like the end now. And if it is that the end, it's a pretty good wrapper on the whole thing, Dev. I enjoyed myself, but found myself being slightly sad at the same time.
I think that's riding it out as well. And it's a shame because, and it's our own fault. I mean, Serena owes us nothing on the court. The records speak for themselves. And I think her impact on the sport will go far beyond what the numbers say beside her name in comparison to some of the game's other greats. She's above that. But when she beats Kontaveit and you begin to perhaps dream of a run that parallels what Jimmy Connors did, even though I know there was a lot of differences between Serena's run and what Jimbo did. But I wanted to believe, and I think that match on Friday night was maybe the perfect encapsulation of how far she's come in such a short time from Toronto, where it looked like there was no way in hell she'd be able to compete on the major stage based on her movement and where she was at in terms of rust. It just seemed impossible. But for her to make that progression to where we stood in the sense that she took out the number 2 seed, Simon, I think that she's the oldest player in WTA to take out a top 3 seed ever. And I think that's just a final testament to what she's meant to the sport. And the fact that in her 109th match, I think, at the US Open, it was her first match to go 3 hours. Like, it was just pretty heady stuff. And I feel like it was perhaps the best way to end a very difficult thing to end, because I don't think anyone wanted this really to end, in the sense that it does feel like a hole is kind of getting created. And we can get to some of the proceedings of the week that was. And after the first round win, the US Open deciding to go through with the tribute stuff, which I think was fine. I had no issue with that. And I think the vibes being far better after she wins a match rather than doing all of the pageantry after a loss like we saw in Toronto. I thought that was much better, Simon. But the Gayle King interview, I don't know what the plan was exactly there, but it was just an interesting spectacle.
We've seen a litany of terrible on-court interviews over the last year. I don't know quite where I'd rank this one. I think it's interesting parallels, isn't it? Because you see in some capacity how well Wimbledon handled their business in terms of the pageantry and in terms of the farewell for someone like Sue Barker. And it was really nice. It was lovely. It was kind of understated in a lot of ways. This kind of felt so wonderfully fitting for the United States of America and the US Open in a lot of ways. I kind of loved it in a roundabout way, just how chaotic and all over the place it was. So thumbs up for me, despite all of the nonsense.
I back it. I mean, they played the Oprah video twice, which I thought was possibly a mistake until I realized that they just really wanted to cash in on Oprah. And I get it. She's Oprah. So it makes sense to me. But it was so thoroughly American. And this from our high horses in Canada. But I dare our American listeners to challenge us in that regard. Regarding Venus and the doubles, the fact that Serena had doubles in her back pocket, at least in terms of the Kontaveit match, was soothing for me because I felt like, oh, okay, it's definitely ending here, but we've got the doubles. And I think it's been an interesting situation that Venus has been placed in as well, Simon, because she's doing a lot of press basically about her sister, and most of the questions are about her sister, and she's also approaching the end of her career. I was wondering, how did you think this played out for Venus? Because there's just got to be so much going on through your head.
Well, it's kind of fitting as well, isn't it, at the end of this career that you're still kind of playing the big sister role. Like you still get thrust into that limelight even in your little sister's final tournament. I'm glad that they played doubles together. And I thought it was also fitting that you played against someone who was 38 and someone who was 17 in their opponents as well, which I thought was someone basically playing their first ever tournament, which I thought was quite wonderful and a fitting moment to play against literally 3 players that are over the age of 35, which was quite funny to watch on that court. Serena, obviously, very much, I think this is doing a lot of the headlines, and it makes a lot of the headlines in terms of what she said in her closing speech on court against Tomljanovic, in saying that Serena does not exist without Venus. And I think where we are today, and just given the star power of Serena Williams and all of the circuitry that's going around with her, people do tend to forget how good of a player her sister was, and the fact that in a lot of ways, Serena did run because Venus walked. Like, those things did happen. She had to fight those fights earlier than her sister did. She had to go through all of those things ahead of the times that her sister really was able to kick the door down if Venus just gently opened it. Well, not gently, forcefully opened it in a lot of ways. Yeah, very much ripped it off the hinges.
Because they had to.
Because they had to, absolutely. So it is, again, like, it's fitting, really, in a lot of ways. But it's a very weird spot for Venus because she's just carrying on business as normal. It's another tournament down. I'll just keep going, just enjoying the sport and keeping on playing. You've got to think at some point there's going to be a retirement of an announcement for Venus as well, but it doesn't seem like it's forthcoming anytime soon.
It doesn't. I believe now she is the leading slam winner on the women's tour with Serena's retirement as well, which just goes to show you how just tremendous these sisters were. No, I've got siblings, you've got siblings, Bush, and I'm just trying to think of this like magnified on a scale times a million, where you're on a stage such as this. And when Venus lost her first round match, I was watching the press conference, and a lot of the questions are about Serena, and I understand why completely, but I also felt a bit bad for Venus because I know this technically was not her moment, and she will get, perhaps if she wants, that final moment in the sun where she is the focal point. But I imagine it's been a tough week for her as well. I mean, the players' box, Simon, I think there's a lot made of Orosine's reactions to the Tomljanovic match, and maybe the lack of reactions of the box in general compared to Serena's husband, who was a relative newbie on the tennis scene and was going pretty wild after every point, which is totally fair as well. But everything was so hyper-analyzed and zoomed in like we suspected it would be when we got to New York. But there was that also New York vibe where you had literally random celebrities sitting in every seat they could, but Serena's box was so curated to a point that it felt like the encapsulation of a pretty ridiculous career in the sense of the people that she brought in to this sport. Like Tiger Woods randomly sitting there. Like, I know he's a tennis fan, but also I'm like, what is happening here? I think it's just one more underline of just like Serena really did transcend tennis.
She really did. And maybe it's a point that we can come on to in a second, but I think her box is a reflection of her stature and her global stature in terms of her fame and in terms of how she was able to transcend this sport. I was thinking about it, and I think maybe this is a point for later on, maybe in parting shots as well, but I will drop it here just for a second, is that does Serena Williams in a lot of ways the last great American global sports star. And I'd say that fully in acknowledgement that you have people like Steph Curry, LeBron James, Simone Biles, like these are still people that have name recognition worldwide. But it's one of those things that you look at some of the sport that have the biggest audiences, and these are not being dominated by Americans in the same way they once were. And I'm curious to sort of do a bit more digging on that subject. On the point of her players box in general, obviously very close friends with Tiger Woods and someone who she name-checked in her Vogue article announcing her evolution away, don't use the R word. And that relationship seems very strong. It seems very genuine. And it seems like you found two people that genuinely inspire each other to try and push themselves to greater heights, even at their advanced age within their sport. So it was cool to see it in action. It's also cool just to see Tiger Woods just going crazy periodically. Someone that you see so under wraps all the time.
The photos of Tiger at the US Open through the years with Fed and then Rafa and Serena, of course. Love it. Love the fist pump. Imagine you're playing and you see Tiger doing the fist pump in your blog. If you're not getting jacked from that, give me a break. Regarding the coverage in general, Simon, I mean, I think apprehensive would be a fair word to use in terms of what we were concerned about heading into the tournament in terms of how this would be covered and maybe not overdoing it, but basically on the sense of like sensationalizing this whole thing. Like maybe we've castigated the Americans for doing, but I generally thought things were okay. I didn't love the McEnroe Everett commentary team. And I listened to Lindsay Davenport a bunch this weekend as well and was longing for her presence on the broadcast. But it could have been worse is kind of where I netted out here.
We did do a whole segment last year that we thought on ways to improve ESPN's coverage in general, specifically around the US Open. That commentary team that you mentioned is one that I'm not quite at muting levels, but it's certainly one of those that I'm clearly not the target audience of.
It feels like they're catching up, which is cool. And like, I totally back this friendship and good for them, but perhaps don't do this on the air during some pretty monumental tennis matches. That's my only suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. There needs to be a lot of modernization, I think, across the board on what the quote unquote product is that ESPN is putting out. This one was interesting, though, in terms of Serena Williams' retirement, because going into it, you really could imagine the sort of metaphor of a giant plate of fruit and vegetables and then one cookie on a plate, and you present it to a 5-year-old and you're just like, come on, please take some of the fruit, please. And in regards to Serena Williams being the cookie here, and they actually were fairly restrained, I thought. I really genuinely thought that they held back somewhat and did show some coverage of other players and talked about some other things. But considering what we thought it was a fairly low bar that we were going into.
Well, I mean, that brings me to Tomljanovic and basically being the perfect foil and handling a moment like this as well as you could. I felt really bad for Annette Kontaveit because I don't think that was the same. And I totally understand her feelings of perhaps isolation would be the best word. And in the press conference afterward, her gutting through it only to break down after the first Estonian or the first question in Estonian, which is basically saying, thanks for this effort. And everyone back home is proud of you. Like, I can get how that could weigh on you emotionally, but I was really impressed by Tomljanovic's approach to this entire thing, Simon. And this is someone who's been around as well. And it's a testament to being in the limelight herself and carrying herself exceptionally well and playing out of her skull. Like, I think it should not be left behind that she played extremely well and Serena made her level up. And basically what we've seen throughout Serena's entire career when she faces these players is that everyone is trying to level up to play their idol, to play the GOAT. And you're going to get their best more often than not. And that's what we saw from Tomljanovic.
Absolutely. I think it speaks volumes of her overall personality and what she brings to the court of being able to handle that moment despite all the ups and downs, what happened in the second set, even what happened in the third set, right, with all the match points and everything that went on with it. I thought she handled it in an incredible way. And I think it stands in a good lesson to all of us that even if you have players that are mentally tough, and mentally tough takes on different forms for different players, like this is an emotional sport, right? The ups and downs, the point swings, the format of the scoring structure is so short that you can go from being on top and dominant to being down a break and in immense trouble within the spell of like 6 minutes in this sport. And Conservate, I feel so terrible for, but I think Tomljanovic, just to her credit, she has a little bit of that like, whatever, I don't give a fuck kind of attitude to it. And that really, really helped, I think, in this atmosphere. And you can't say enough about someone like Annette Conservate, right? Because you can always say, just have a bit more of that attitude, have a bit more of that I don't give a fuck attitude. It's like, well, it's not that easy, right? It really isn't that straightforward to have that.
Caring is fine. Caring should be supported. Yeah,
exactly.
Like, if you care that much, I back that. I really, really back that, because I appreciate how much you have to put in to get to this level. And she's had a really tough year as well with COVID and long COVID and dealing with that. So it's tough. I mean, her peers, I think I wanted to finish on the tour itself, Bush, and hearing the entire tour, men and women, talk about Serena and her impact, and someone like Borna Coric, who you wouldn't think of as the first person to be inspired by Serena Williams, but he was, and it mattered that the Williams sisters paved that way. But I think that's what's taking me aback as well. I understand, maybe, I want to say as someone who's not Caucasian and like doesn't look like a typical tennis establishment Wimbledon sweater vest person, I always gravitated towards the Williams sisters, but perhaps I didn't understand that it went so much far beyond that as well, because it literally anyone it was everyone. It was everyone that got something from her. Everyone drew something. And I think those people are so rare, not just in sport, but in life, that I think that's something I really appreciated a lot this week as well, because you don't hear people wax poetic as much as they should, because maybe we take them for granted. But this week was a good example of hearing examples and anecdotes of the impact Serena Williams has made on them. And I think I really love that aspect.
Well, I guess speaking as someone who does look like the prototypical tennis fan, the complete opposite end of this, like I should be wearing a cardigan and going to a boating,
some sort of top hat,
sailing club,
monocle combination.
Would not be out of place on the Wimbledon grounds, put it that way. Anyway, I think the one thing above everything else that my outlook and my view on the world is that I'm always craving some level of agitation and shake-up from normality. And I think she was just a perfect embodiment of what this sport needed at the time, to sort of drag it out from where it was into a level of, to modernize the sport, to really bring a level of fire, to really like break through that idea of what tennis had become and what it still in some ways is. But it's less of that, I think, thanks to both Serena and Venus Williams. And for that, I think all of us can be eternally grateful, because we desperately need to see more widespread availability and access for our sport. And I think just them being there and their records and the way that they played is such a good thing long term for the sport. So I think we can just be incredibly happy that they existed in this moment. And yes, bittersweet that it's over, but in general, thank fuck for the Williams sisters.
You said it finally, Bush. Serena did her final presser after the third round loss, and I mean, she held court and answered every question. But she did say that she always loved Australia. And I do wonder if her form the last couple of days says to her, perhaps give it another go. Give me a percentage chance we see her on a tennis court competitively again.
10%. I think it's probably actually higher than Ash Barty is. So
wow. Well, then I have to go higher than that. Damn. I really walked myself into a corner with my Ash Barty prediction that now I have to say Serena is definitely coming back as well. All right. You heard it first. Williams Barty 2023. Cannot wait. Anything else, Bush, before we get to some draw analysis?
No, I don't think so. I'm not grateful that the tournaments are like that Serena Williams is out at all, because I think she actually brought a lot of attention to this tournament in both positive and negative ways that we always crave in this sport, because I think it desperately
look at us. Tennis is good.
I will say there's kind of one closing thought on this, because it's been something that's been going through my mind. I've been very unimpressed with some of the legacy media's coverage of Serena Williams, like some of the more long form pieces that have been written, even by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, like all this kind of stuff in North America, and then your sort of Times, Telegraph, Guardian stuff in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't seen a whole lot of good stuff, I've got to say. There's been a few articles dotted here and there, but I think the way that she's been covered, I think those were largely done from the perspective of forward-looking through like her business ventures and that kind of thing, and less so of what the legacy she actually has left on the court is. And I think that's perhaps orchestrated and planned. I don't know. I'm just talking out of my arse here, but in general, like I think it's been pretty shit, that side of things. I've been far more impressed with some of the more personal pieces that have been written about what Serena has meant to an individual, as opposed to what sort of structurally she's put out there.
Louisa Thomas, who's good across the board, had a nice piece in the New Yorker. Without Venus, there is no Serena. I'd recommend that. But I think the can't wait to see what she does on Wall Street narrative does not speak to me by any means, and it kind of makes me cringe. So I'm with you on that. All right. When we come back after the break, Simon, we go through the Open Era Fantasy Draft, US Open Edition. We'll see who's hitting right now, who's missing. Plus, we cover the players that weren't picked and see if we were wrong or if we were right. All of that coming up after the break. Welcome back to the Open Air Podcast. Simon, last week, as the commissioner of the Open Air League, you made some controversial decisions in terms of the rules, in terms of making some improvements to the fantasy draft landscape. 1 weekend of the tournament, how do you feel about your rulings and where our competition stands?
I just want to put some distance between the idea that I'm also the commissioner. I'm the host, ladies and gentlemen. Host, and I'm not even calling myself the founder.
This is extreme Vince McMahon in the WWF style, where he was doing the in-ring announcing, doing all the TV stuff, but also was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Clearly, you're channeling this.
I'm just saying that there is an opportunity for someone else to step in here and take the commissioner role, because I don't really feel comfortable in that format. I'm just a spokesperson. I'm just the person that has the microphone, Dev.
Roger Goodell is smiling. All right, well, so far, 1 week in, a clear leader, Vanch, Tennis Soap, has not had a player eliminated on their team, which is not to be said for anyone else. The clear leader by a good margin, Rafa Nadal, Stanisova, Sinner, who had a tough bout with Brandon Nakashima that he survived, Cam Norrie, who's looking good, Caroline Garcia, who's looking very good, Pliskova, Tomjanovic as his bonus player, so double the points. Vanch is cruising. The douchebag, Simon, the team you doubted so heavily, I would almost say inconsiderately as well, with some of the barbs I was hearing during that show. But look at me now, once again primed for a podium finish. JPEG, Jess Pagila, leading the charge. Just taking a look at these teams, Simon, we picked pretty well. I think always the fear when we get to these kind of drafts is missing the winner or missing the huge storyline because we didn't pick them. And that's what's going to happen when we're limited to only making 7 selections each. But I'm looking at these teams, and generally we were on the right track.
I really think so, yeah. And I think it's testament to how well Vanch picked that he managed to have 7 players still in this. It's quite an achievement. We've not seen that in Open Era history. We've got 2 drafts now.
2 drafts, yeah. We can say that. I think we can say that. Yeah, that's fine.
I shouldn't have qualified it, should I? I should have powered through it. Everyone listening for the first time is like, oh, God. Wow. There's legacy to this. Goodness me. Well done, everyone. That must mean something. So, this tournament actually, have you said, I mean, it's had some surprises, hasn't it? But in general, it's been relatively smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Like you had some big shots in the first week, but just given some of the Grand Slams we've had historically over this year and going through the COVID years, you can't say you're sitting here going like, oh, I cannot believe that she lost or he lost early. And that, like, maybe the biggest one of those you would probably say is Taylor Fritz or Felix Auger-Aliassime, or even whatever Stefanos Tsitsipas threw up during the first week of this week. Those are probably the biggest ones. And then you could look at someone like Simona Halep. But even then, like, these are in general, you can understand and qualify these losses in a way that some of the other ones that we've seen over the last 2 years, you can't.
It's true. And I mean, the players that were playing well heading into New York, some of them just maintained this. I think Samsonova is a perfect example, winning in Washington, winning in Cleveland. Caroline Garcia, who looks just utterly ridiculous, doing well off the back of Cincinnati as well. Some trends are following suit. I think Simona Halep was a bit of a shock for me, but also that being said, even in Toronto, I was a bit worried about her fitness and where she was at health-wise. Just getting back into the grind of these high stakes matches and getting deeper into tournaments. Would her body withstand in a massive humidity situation? Obviously, that's not easy. So perhaps not that big of a surprise if we zoom out a bit. But no, I'm proud of us. I think we did well. I'm looking at the favorites still existing and still thriving at this point as we get to the draw. But in terms of the players we didn't pick, I think that's a bit interesting because we all had our reasons for not picking your Denis Shapovalovs or your Rybakines or your Fernandezes, but let's see how they did. And Denis Shapovalov somehow became the last Canadian singles player standing, Simon, which I don't think anyone would have safely predicted heading into this tournament. He did okay in Cincinnati, got some wins under his belt after a really tough season, but this was the full Shapo experience once again in a nice weak dose, Simon. And the Rublev match I thought was thoroughly entertaining. Shapo and Rublev, kind of similar dudes in terms of on-court mannerisms. I think Shapo yells at his box way more, and Rublev yells at himself a lot more, which is endearing and kind of why I back Andre Rublev. But it was the full Shapo boom or bust, right, Simon? The margins are pretty small for him.
I was dreading watching Denis Shapovalov play against Cam Norrie, and just it would have been punishing, absolutely punishing for Shapo to try and play against that just human backboard at the moment. And I think that's testament to how Shapo's tournament went. It was all over the shop. We had 2 5-setters. We had him on the verge, I think, against Andre Rublev. Probably should have seen that tiebreak out as well in closing. And Carabella's Bainer as well in that second round. He somehow threw together a pretty solid match, even though he looked absolutely dreadful for parts of that second set. It's just too inconsistent, isn't it, across the board? And I think that's one of the things that has really followed his career. Like, the highs have been very, very high and the lows have been absolutely dreadful. And that's kind of what the microcosm was in this tournament. And it's going to be tough for him to recover some of these ranking points. But in general, though, there's still positive signs, Dev.
Exactly. Once again, one of these situations where the bar is really low. Like, I didn't have a lot of faith heading into this tournament that Shapo would make a deep run, and I wasn't alone based on the fact that he wasn't picked. But the question is, Simon, can you be this streaky and be successful at the top of the men's game? Probably not, right?
No, absolutely not. Not in today's tennis. There's too many good players. There's too many consistent players. It's impossible to be a top 10 player, which I think is what he aspires to. He has been a top 10 player. No, you just can't be like that.
And you mean you compare him to Felix Auger-Aliassime, and it's like, well, Felix is consistently consistent, sometimes for worse, sometimes to a negative extent, but that consistency can tuck you in safely into a nice position where you're accumulating some match wins when you need to. I mean, Shapo has shown glimpses of that, but not to that level. So it remains to be seen how his season ends, but glimpses of greatness, as always. Someone else we didn't pick from Canada, Leylah Fernandez, Simon, who we got some feedback from our listeners saying, what? You didn't pick the finalists? And after her first round match, that looked pretty foolish, but she ran into Samsonova, the buzzsaw. The streakiness in Leylah's matches, I look at her as someone who is consistent in terms of mindset and outlook and the positivity perhaps she brings to the game. That seems to me to stay pretty constant during a match, at least for a young player, which I think is pretty rare. But the streakiness in terms of play, I think that's been a consistent factor this summer, at least, where she goes through some stretches where she's just not able to put things together. And I think in that first set against Samsonova, that was the case. And again, Samsonova is on an incredible heater, so there's no shame losing to her. But both Raducanu and Fernandez, Simon, out early. 2021 probably will never happen again, in the sense like what we saw in that final might not be repeatable even in the zany world that is the WTA with the parity they have. It still seems unlikely.
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't pick the finalists, but we also didn't pick the winner. So I guess take that into consideration of whether we thought this was going to happen again. In terms of Leila Rani Fernandez, she's currently ranked 14 in the world. She's been as high as 13. She has a Grand Slam final under her belt. I think this is about where she nets out. And I know that's ridiculous saying of someone who is 19. It seems like a good number. Like, it just seems roughly where she will be for her career, between 10 and 20. Like, I just don't think she has necessarily the weapons to get into that top 10 consistently. She's an incredible fighter, an incredible player in so many ways, but like, to find that separation, especially at the top end of the game, especially in the WTA, is so difficult. I'm going to eat my words in 5 years' time when she's world number one.
You will.
But for the time being, as I sit here behind my microphone without any stakes on this, it doesn't seem like that shocking of a loss against Samsonova, who's had just a barnstorming run over the last 2 months.
Another one of Ancha's picks, who Tennis Soap. Disband Tennis Soap. They're a juggernaut. Get the officials involved.
Nationalize
Tennis Soap. Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina. We didn't pick her either. Which I think after we recorded, Simon, we both to each other were like, well, I think we might have effed up here. But we did it. Because she kept getting shitty court assignments and then followed up with a loss to a qualifier. I feel really bad for Elena Rybakina because I think this Wimbledon celebration tour was just so anonymous and non-existent and mired in nothingness almost, that it ended almost as we expected, with a silent thud in the first round on an outer court.
Do you think some of this is in any way related to the nation change? Like, do you think any of that is related to her lack of widespread coverage in quote unquote Western media? Or is that too harsh? Am I tinfoil hatting this to a certain extent? Because, I mean, she won Wimbledon, for goodness sake. And again, I apologize for this because I'm just going to take a running jump at it. Just given the frothing at the mouth that some of these tournaments and some of these legacy medias have done for tall blonde women who win these tournaments, you would have thought that they would have been more than happy to showcase Lena Rybakina in any of their pages, and that really hasn't been the case, suggesting that these newspapers and legacy media may be inherently sexist in some capacity. If you can't guess on where I'm heading on this one,
yeah.
Do you think there's any possibility that's true from the nation change?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Kazakhstan flag beside her name is not super sexy for a lot of these people involved. And the fact that her residence is in Moscow probably isn't something a lot of these people want to touch either. I think there's a lot of layers to this. Mm-hmm. The no points as well, and the fact that her ranking is not improved on the back of winning a major. It's super weird. A lot of things, I think, have combined into the situation, but it's a damn shame. And I feel like the tennis world does a good job of remembering the greats and acknowledging these accomplishments where they're racking up titles, and we talk about where they fall historically and compare it to the greats of yesteryear. But I think we do a poor job of celebrating the breakthroughs, and we immediately ask what's next and show me more. And Emma Raducanu will be chasing that next slam because she has to prove that it wasn't a fluke. And immediately after Rybakina wins a slam, we ask, where are there more? Or show me more. And it just feels kind of shitty. But also something that I've felt has been around tennis for as long as I've watched it.
Absolutely. And just in terms of tennis, from a tennis standpoint, we did say in summarizing the other last week that Rybakina had never been past the third round at the US Open. It was a slower surface, something that she'd not been particularly, she didn't have historically good results on. So there was some element of that of why she didn't get picked. That being said, probably still should have been selected. Agreed.
Big tournament for Chinese tennis, a breakthrough tournament in many respects. TikTok Tennis James did pick Zheng Qiwen, who lost. Mm-hmm. Bit surprisingly. That being said, I feel like Julie Niemeyer is a very strong player who's had some pretty strong results herself this season. So not a complete shock maybe in that regard. She's a Wimbledon quarterfinalist. But overall, Bush, a breakthrough tournament for a country, I think that's been waiting to get back in the tennis limelight since Li Na. I wonder if that's fair to say, but a record amount of Chinese women that made the third round here. Wu making a run on the men's side. He lost to Daniil Medvedev, the number 1 seed, but fascinating times in terms of Chinese tennis. I mean, Peng Shuai happened. This all happened. The WTA basically bailed on China. They still bailed on them. We'll talk about plans for the end of the season in parting shots, but the players are turning out.
Julie Niemeyer robbed us of Zheng Qiweng versus Iga Swiatek, and for that I will never forgive her. No, I'm kidding. She played great in that match. She did. It was on Zheng to finish it off, and she did not. Yeah, I mean, if you look at this draw and you look at the number of Chinese flags that there are throughout it on the WTA side, I think in a lot of ways, the way that we were talking about Serena Williams, we can also draw on Li Na as well. That these number of players that are in here is testament to her career and her brilliance. And this is about the time that you would expect a lot of those players to be coming through, just given about the 10-year gap that it has been. There is a legacy which she leaves behind. And in that capacity, none of this is particularly surprising with a nation that has literally every single resource they could possibly want to throw at this if they wanted to support these players through it. I think if China wanted to have a world number 1 player in men and women's tennis, they could probably have that within 10 years. It's just a matter of devoting the eye towards it and making sure that it happens. That all of that being said, it is quite a feat to see so many of these players do so well in this tournament. And consistently, I think this year has been a pretty good example of that with how many Chinese women there are inside of the top 100. I think it's coming at some point. I think we're going to have a very, very big crop of Chinese players who are going to be very condensed inside of the top 50. And I think that's good for tennis in general. I think it's one that we should celebrate and be very supportive of.
Zhang Zhizhen lost a tough first round encounter with Tim van Rijthoven that went the distance. Right, Van Rijthoven saved some match points, but Zhang's haircut beard combo is top 5 in the world. Just superb class. On the men's side, players that we didn't pick that have made runs. I thought about Marin Cilic, Bush. I really did. I mean, how can you discount a former US Open champion? But Marin Cilic is just still here. And you look at some of the people who have fallen in the first round, and I know Marin has had his own ups and downs throughout his illustrious career, but I really just like the old dudes hanging around and old in the sense of the tour, but hanging around and still showing, yep, I'm a pretty big danger on these courts. And we speak into the future, we talk about a potential Carlos Alcaraz match, but it won't be easy for Charlie. And that's just the Marin Cilic way.
I really did feel like that Marin Cilic versus Dan Evans third round was the A24 of tennis nerdery. Oh man, look at the cinematography in this scene. Look at the golden ratio that's been applied. I really felt like it watching some of those matches where I'm like, man, these two dudes are just doing so many of the little things really well. I'm getting so nerdy watching these two dudes play when no one else actually cares about either of them, despite the fact that Marin Cilic is a former champion here. It was one for the anoraks. It was fantastic. It might be one of my favorite matches so far, which is strange for a random fourth setter in the third round. I really, really love watching both of them play. Loved Evans at the net as well, basically being like, yeah, you were better than me. Fair enough.
Love it. Yeah. I love that. Evo also not having Jack Draper getting that spot ahead of him on the Davis Cup too. I don't know if you saw that, Bush.
Slammed the door.
Really not happy. Jack Draper beating Felix, but then retiring to Khachanov, very disappointing. But one for the future. Lefty British swag, Bush. Is the UK ready for this?
He's a really good player, isn't he, Dev? And I think you saw it not just in the win that he had, but in general, he holds himself well. Is he going to be a top 10 player? That's a good question. That really is of how good he is across all of these surfaces. And he could be. Yeah. He looks really bloody good. So I'm excited to watch the next couple of months progression for him, especially at the back end of the year. You could see him winning a title in this soft, nothing end to the year and have a really good start to 2023 as well. Finally,
I was doing the eyes emoji to a certain match because it involved your man, Lorenzo Musetti, and I wanted to talk about him still being in the tournament and possibly playing Jannik Sinner. which would have been quite fun as Italian tennis enjoys its day in the sun. But someone we saw in Vancouver years ago, Bush, Ilya Ivashka, at the Vancouver Open, is in the fourth round. 28 years old, been around 2 fourth rounds. I think the fourth round at Wimbledon last year was his best there, but ITF grinder, challenger grinder, doing it the hard way. Probably all those things that Andrea Gadenzi hates or doesn't respect or support are encapsulated in Ilya Ivashka becoming quite a solid tour pro a bit late in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And also someone who is modeling hydrogen as well. So we have to give extra respect to and put respect on his name. He is testament to all those things that you were saying, like grinder, hard worker, did the circuit, ITF, stuck around at challenger level, won a bunch of times at that level. Like, he's just a really good player. I think he's been as high as 40 in the world. Maybe he's been inside of the top 50, which is a good spot. Also someone that just strikes an enormous tennis ball, like just tees off on the ground, big serve, all of those things. He's never going to have the movement to challenge at the top end of Grand Slams. That being said, he's made it to this stage. And I think it's incredibly evident in watching Musetti versus Ivashka is that Musetti moves better, has a better read of the game, all these things. But he also just got bullied on a court and in terms of just being overpowered and over-muscled. And I think that's where Musetti is in terms of his game at the moment. He looks like he could do with an off-season to just go and hit the gym. Yeah. Just like get buff, get bigger, get stronger, work on the core muscles and come back and be stronger and fitter overall. And, look out when that's the case. I'm on the record of saying that I do think he's going to win a Grand Slam in his career. I think he will win the French Open. So if he's able to put that work in, I think next year is going to be really interesting to watch with him.
Some excellent potential matches coming up this week. I think the winner is on the teams that we picked, though, Simon, on both sides. I'm pretty confident in that. Iga Swiatek, you were pretty adamant she should have been picked earlier in the draft. And I have to say, that looks like a fair statement. She looks back on track. Got JPEG. The match of the tournament so far for me, Muguruza, Kvitova, Simon, that tiebreak in the third set was wild. Some incredible match point saves. Two great players doing their damn thing. Petra's a threat here. Danielle Collins. I would not be surprised to see a Danielle Collins, Iga Swiatek semifinal, Bush. But do you believe that we've picked the winners on both sides on our teams? Will there be a floater that somehow stuns everyone?
No, I don't think so. I think the only one that you could make an argument that's surprising would be Ludmila Samsonova, but she got picked. So I think that's fine. Like, also she got picked in the second round as well. So she got picked early. I think that's testament to where we are. It sure as hell looks like the final is going to be Coco Gauff versus Iga Swiatek, but we'll wait and see, Dev.
We shall. Going to be a fun week to close out what's been a pretty, I would say, enthralling and emotional US Open. When we come back to wrap up this week's show, as always, it's parting shots. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. It's that time again, Simon. Parting shots. We begin with Andrei Rublev, who dispatched Denis Shapovalov in 5 sets. Andrei talking to Eurosport this week. Andrei loves the States. I think it's pretty safe to say. You see him on his IGs. He's going to sporting events. He's going to concerts. And he was talking to Eurosport about this. He says, quote, "I went Monday and Friday to Harry Styles and Tuesday to 20 pilots." I think it's 21 pilots. I'm not sure for sure. But I digressed. Continuing. Quote, "I would have liked to go to 20 pilots again, but they only performed one time." The interviewer asked, did he meet Harry Styles? And Rublev replies, quote, "No, they don't do those things for me," laughed Rublev, referring to the ATP. Quote, "I don't know how all the players, they met all the stars. You can't imagine. I asked once to go to an NBA game in Miami, and they gave me the last row at the top. And I think I was in the top 10 at the time. And then I see all the players, Zverev, Sonego, Berrettini, Ruud, all of them in the first row, taking pics with all the stars. And I say, how does that work? And I still want to know how that works." Simon, how did Lorenzo Sonego get into this crew ahead of Andrei Rublev? I'm mad. I'm mad as hell about this.
I guess you could say that he was not invited into Harry's house. Come on, but yes, falling again. No, we'll move on swiftly from my terrible attempts at puns here. Poor Andre. Poor Andre. Sad crying emoji. That's all I can say about this. But how did he? Maybe he needs a better publicist? Maybe he needs a better PR team? Is that what we're trying to say here?
Probably. I mean, who knows? The real sinister aspect of this, maybe they didn't want to put Andrei Rublev front and center as a Russian player, as like an ambassador for the tour, which would probably fall in line with some of the other decisions this summer. But I did feel bad for him generally. Like I said in the last segment, Simon, I like how I don't support like the self-flagellation and him beating himself up, but for the most part, Andre is yelling at himself. He's not directing his anger at his box and telling his box they're pieces of shit, etc., which some other players do a lot, which I hate. So I stand him, I back him. I hope he gets some backstage access soon enough. Simon, kit watch. We love kits. We love talking about them. The fashion section on our Discord is bumping all the time as we both praise and eviscerate some things we've seen. The Shelby Rogers Fila kit. Some would say shocking. I say innovative. The Casper Ruud Burgundy Yonex kind of paint splash kit. Terrible. Shocking. But I think we can agree. New Balance is pulling out the big guns for Coco Gauff. This kit is pretty good.
Yes. I will say yes. I liked it. It does have perhaps some elements of tire print, is what I would say about it. That's kind of one thing that I did notice. But in general, do love some innovation within kits. Will back this one.
Tire print is in, man. Also, generally, Fila is doing a good job. And I think we deserve a lot of credit for this again. For pushing Fila into the 21st century, but interesting times. I mean, there's a hole to be filled by what Nike's doing and what Adidas is doing to a lesser extent. You had Bianca Andreescu openly complaining about her Nike kit before one of her matches, which probably not a good sign. But like what Fila's doing. Anything else stick out to you, Simon, kit wise?
Well, I think it's interesting that we mentioned Goff and we lead with her in a lot of ways because at least she's the face, right, of New Balance. She's the face of, certainly of women's tennis in New Balance, and of all tennis in New Balance, like, let's be honest here. And I think it's kind of fascinating that Goff is open to doing these kind of interesting, innovative, boundary-pushing kits and that get people talking, because obviously Serena Williams was very influential in that regard of being someone that stood out on the tour just for how she was pushing her fashion and pushing just interesting things that she wore on court. And I think we've kind of lost a little bit of that, right? We've lost a little bit of players not afraid to take risks and not afraid to do things that are kind of interesting in style-wise. So I'm hopeful that we start to see more players who are known for their fashion and trying to do new things, because it sure as shit ain't coming on the men's side. Like, there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff coming out there. And I know you're somewhat restricted in terms of what you can do in terms of just a pair of shorts and t-shirt, but like, come on, we could do a little bit, can't we? We can have a little bit more interesting. Give me a tie-dye shirt or something just to get things a little more fashionable in 2022.
I'm with you. Andy Murray shoes were pretty cool. Those Under Armour shoes, I dug those. And the Carlos Alcaraz apron kit. We haven't seen that during a match yet, perhaps for a night match, but I'm sure that'll make shocking headlines around the world. Moving on quickly, Simon, the 10-point tie breaks. I'm curious if you've forgotten if at any point during this tournament that they exist and that it is happening during a match. I know a lot of people are pretending they haven't forgotten and they always knew that they are 10-point tie breaks, but there's been a couple of moments this week where I did forget and I feel ashamed, but I was hoping for some backing here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of times that a player's got to 6 points in the tiebreak and I've whispered over to someone who's watching, match point here, and looked like a fool.
And also, I'm like, hey, wow, this player looks really non-stressed and mentally just fine with the stakes being extremely high when they're not, because there was nothing close to a match point on the line, Simon. I'm glad I'm not alone here.
They're good, though. I do like 10-point tiebreakers. I think they have a level of finality. I guess if you can't win over 10 points, if you haven't won over 6 games, if you haven't won over 5 sets, shame on you.
And there's room for momentum shifts, and there's room for someone to fall behind only to seize the chance. And I think that's kind of what you want. We were talking a bunch in the Discord about like the scoring in tennis and best of 3 versus best of 5, which I know is a troubling debate at the best of times. But perhaps in the viewpoint of making the women's game more equitable, I don't know if that's the right word, but lessening the chance for shocking upsets because you have more tennis to go off of, and there's more evidence to use to indicate who is the better player. Perhaps we shorten the sets as we get to 4, and then the 5th set's just a super tiebreak, as I think Vivek was suggesting on the Discord as well. There's opportunities here to go a bit further, and as much as we've ragged on Patrick Mouratoglou for some of the stuff that he's associated with, I do think being on the forefront of thinking about ways to perhaps change how we decide matches towards the end is cool and intriguing, because I definitely feel the stakes elevate, Simon, for these super breakers, and they're pretty special. So perhaps we should explore that more.
Sure, I'm down for it. I mean, they are trying some of this stuff, aren't they? They're trying it at the next gen finals and that kind of thing.
Right.
Maybe failed experiment over 4 sets of what that looks like. I don't hate that format either, but I don't know that it's necessarily ready for prime time. It's an interesting one. I think more experimentation is good, and I think trying to pick some tournaments throughout the year that get sort of designated with a trial run of things might be an interesting way of going about things. But in general, try and find me a tournament that's willing to do that. Maybe it's tennis in the land, or Ostrava with 3 exclamation marks.
Yes. True trailblazers. I know they'll push the envelope. All right. We're going to go to some Victoria Azarenka, the Victoria Azarenka section, perhaps. Simon, we need a new name for this. Azarenka actions, perhaps. But we begin, she played Marta Kostyuk, who's from Ukraine, of course, and who's been outspoken about the silence from some of her fellow tour pros from Russia and Belarus regarding the invasion and her thoughts on that. She played Victoria Azarenka. I think people were curious to see what happened after the match, the handshake. Everyone went for the handshake, but I found it interesting, Simon, that Marta reached out to Victoria Azarenka before the match and kind of indicated to her she wasn't going to shake hands, and they do a racket tap. And Victoria Azarenka has talked about what she's trying to do behind the scenes as well, and kind of explaining why she's taking the stand she has and trying to maybe explain her rationale. Really difficult subject, really difficult circumstance. We talked about trying to put ourselves in Marta Kostyuk's shoes, and it'd be really tough. But in some ways, I thought this was handled well, in the sense that Kostyuk did communicate with Azarenka beforehand, and it wasn't like a surprise or shock to anyone. I think making the best of a really tough situation is what they tried to do here.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think for all of the noise around it and the fact that it did make press, didn't it? It got a wider coverage in terms of these two players not shaking hands at the end. I thought it was actually handled fairly maturely. And again, you can understand Marta Kostyuk and where she lies here. Her country is being bombed still every single day. They are at war with a country that invaded them, that has no right on sovereign land. All that sort of stuff is accurate. And yeah, like it shouldn't be business as normal. You can totally understand the line and the stance that she has taken, some of the actions and the way that she's gone about things. I think you will find people that disagree with her in general. And I think we've spoken on this podcast about some of the actions which she was pushing for, which we didn't feel were appropriate, i.e. Wimbledon and the way that was handled. But in general, like, this is a 21-year-old who's watching friends, family, people being bombed every single day. And like, wouldn't you do everything? Wouldn't you do everything to try and stop that? I'm so absolutely, yes, it's understood.
Yeah. Victoria Azarenka also in press talking about coaching and calling for tennis to address allegations of manipulative coaches, that young players are being exploited right and left on the tour, in her words. This comes on the back of former world number 39, Fiona Ferro, accusing her former coach, Pierre Boutier, of raping her as a 15-year-old, which is truly horrendous stuff. Fiona Ferro, extremely brave coming forward now at this point to hope to get some justice. But I think what Victoria Azarenka said, Bush, was important. Quote, "The recent story with Ferro that came out, I don't know how to put in words sometimes. All you can do is check in on the person, give your hand. What What can I do? What can I help with? So, I mean, I applaud her for being brave. I hope the situation she's going to come out of is stronger and tennis is not ruined for her because of that. I think that's a very, very heavy topic. She goes on to say, we need to do a better job of safeguarding against coaches. Quote, as player counsel, it's almost like the number one subject to us because we see these vulnerable young ladies that are getting taken advantage of in different situations. It's well worth a read. Simon Briggs in the Telegraph. Pam Shriver came forward talking about her experience as a teenager with her coach who was older, coming forward with this. This is a serious subject. And I'm glad Victoria Azarenka used her platform to raise this.
Yeah, as am I. Simon Briggs has done great work on this file in general throughout the course of 2022. So obviously encourage you to go back and check out his writing from all of this year in regards to this topic. Power abuse is a horrendous thing, Dev, across the board. It still exists within society, and it's deeply, I think, embedded still within tennis. And there's multiple layers to this, and there's multiple steps, I think, to address this as a problem. One of the first ones being, of course, just at not necessarily a superficial level, but just at the level of people starting to understand it and talk about it. Like that's the level as a consumer. You're actually aware that this stuff exists within inside of our sport, and just being aware of it is a good starting point for pressure to get placed on authorities to do something about it. There's obviously a role for the players as well, and for senior players on tour to start saying that there needs to be tough sanctions, there needs to be tough safeguards put in place to make sure that everyone who is in a vulnerable position is taken care of. And this is a story that has a lot more legs. And I think, unfortunately, Dev, we're going to see more of these cases come out in the next little while now that these stories have started to come out in press. And that's going to be horrifying. It's going to be important. But at the same time, we need to reflect that there's people behind these stories and give our full support to those who are vulnerable or have been in an abusive position, because they are the most important people in this scenario.
Fiona Farrow deserves all the support in the world, and I'm glad in that sense that Victoria Azarenka spoke up about that as well, because the idea of tennis being ruined for her, or her dream, the dream she had, being destroyed by this man, it's just awful, just straight up awful.
Yeah, it's fucking horrifying. There's no other ways of saying it.
Yeah, it's fucking jeez. There's no segue after that. To close, or my last item at least, the WTA is not going back to China anytime soon. Maybe not the biggest surprise, but we had reporting during the week, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, confirming Sports Illustrated's report that the WTA finals are heading to Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, Texas. I do find it hilarious, slightly or morbidly hilarious, that they went from China because of Peng Shuai and multiple reasons, and they chose a state that is restricting women's rights on a daily basis, it seems, in Texas. Great call, folks. But they're going to Texas, and it seems like they're kind of moving shop back to North America, Simon. They'll have a WTA 500 event in San Diego in October, the 1000 event in Guadalajara, and then these Fort Worth finals at the end of October. Also recognizing the state of the tours and the prominence of American women, it does feel like a bit of a power shift in general back to the States. Putting my marketing hat on, though, this feels like a calculated move as we get into a new phase of tennis in North America and the United States especially.
Agreed. And who would not want to attend the powerhouse that is Dickies Arena, Dev? It rolls off the tongue. You know,
a multi-purpose facility.
I loved the finals in Guadalajara. I think that's a really good place. I'm glad they're keeping a 1000 event there. I would have liked to have seen it retain that status for the World Tour finals. I think it would have been really cool to set up shop there. I think you touched on an important point of the fact that this gets moved to Texas and Florida have not had exactly the best relationship with women's rights over the last little while. So it's an interesting time for tournaments to be moved and for companies and for tours making political decisions on these issues. It's all very well and good taking a stance against China when it's like that, but you'll have to follow through when, in a lot of cases, countries that you want to remain cozy with do pretty horrendous things as well. And we may never go anywhere else again, just if you want to examine the geopolitical situations of what all nation states have done, but some more than others, it has to be said.
Well said, sir. Anything else before we get to 2 challenges remaining?
Yeah, just one quick thing that I wanted to ask you in general. Who was your favorite celebrity sighting at the US Open? I had a couple that I was excited to get to, but did you have any in this first week?
That's a tough question. Maybe not favorite, but the juxtaposition of Mike Tyson sitting next to Martina Navratilova with her dog, I found fascinating. And then Mike Tyson back the next day, like really early to watch some outdoor court tennis, I was surprised by. I feel like I'm blanking on some of the more notable stars I saw. Who are yours?
Just a question off the top. Mike Tyson still a registered sex offender? I think he is, right?
Yikes. Yeah. Yeah. And Martina as well. I mean, yeah, it was one of those things where it's like everyone who could scam their way into this event to see Serena did. And they called in any favor possible to get in there. No matter if you're A level, B level, C level. Like, where's the cutoff?
It's true. Anna Wintour was in Serena's box, I think. Anna Wintour was in the box. We saw tons of it. Jared Leto was there. Zendaya was there. Obviously, Woods was there. Seal was there, I saw. Of course, Ben Stiller hanging around. Ben Stiller, by the way, not famous enough, I would say, to constantly have the cameras pointed at him. Appreciate that he likes tennis a lot, but this is a bit much. We can do better than this.
Wow.
And Vera Wang, of course. Vera Wang.
I don't know, though. I think he might be right on the cutoff line, though, of being that famous. Along with Seal. I think that they are... It's an extremely late 90s, early aughts level of celebrity, but it still matters.
It matters to us,
damn it. Ben Stiller. I don't know why I'm standing Ben Stiller. I don't even like Ben Stiller that much, and yet here I am defending him to the death. I feel like I'm blanking though on some other people I saw randomly watching tennis. Yeah, it's always interesting to see who has got the best PR people, who's got the best publicists to get them in these seats. I saw PK Subban there. Yeah.
Bella Hadid was there, I saw, who looked like she was dressed as a 70-year-old woman, which is always very funny. Do love Gen Z fashion sometimes. It does make me smile. Amazing. Then again, they would have said the same thing about our fashion, so goes around in circles. All
right, sir. 2 challenges remaining. You're going to a fair.
I went to a fair, Dev. I went to a fair.
Past tense.
Sorry, Dev. Yes, went to a fair. I went to the Kinmount Fair, where I'm staying at the moment. Saw myself some animals. Saw myself some sheep and some local bakeries being awarded ribbons. So I got my full display of country fair action. The highlight of this, of course, was me being rural enough to see garden tractors pulling large items down the middle of a grandstand in a park. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, but at the same time, I was kind of into it. I dug it.
Any animals stand out to you? Any animal you can see going to the finals, semifinals?
I mean, there was this beautiful calf there, picturesque. It looked like it came out of a children's book. It was wonderful. It had lovely big black eyes, big lovely markings on it. So I was taken by this calf.
Wow, possibly TMI, but I'm glad I asked that challenging question. Amazing stuff, Simon. I was gonna go a bit jokey and praise falafel just as a food, because I've just had some great experiences with falafel this week. But this kind of came to mind, especially yesterday. But if you haven't seen, horrific historic floods in Pakistan have consumed nearly 1/3 of the country, affecting millions and millions and millions of people. Situation is absolutely dire, and it's very bad. And this is a disaster that has been facilitated by climate change, and it's Pakistan today, but I think this will be somewhere else next as we get further into this absolute clusterfuck that we've developed for ourselves. But I do want to draw some attention to the contrast perhaps in the reaction. And I know Russia invaded Ukraine, and there's an instigator and a victim in this situation. And I am not saying support Ukraine less, but I would like to see some more public backing for Pakistan in this time, a country that is involved in tennis as well, that has had historic tennis moments. I would like to see the tennis community in the US Open maybe acknowledge this more and do what they can to perhaps pay tribute or just show that they care, even a small amount. Because I think the way disasters are viewed by us in the West in terms of severity is often about where they're located and whether or not that matters to us. And I'd like to see that change, Simon.
No, agreed entirely. And I'm glad you brought it up because it's been obviously a horrendous week. It's been horrific to watch the scenes from there. To all the people that are saying, like, we one day will come up and see the results of climate change in action. I mean, no, it's been happening. It's been happening in front of our noses for the last 10 years. We've seen mudslides in Sri Lanka over the last few years. I think Sri Lanka lost almost 200,000 houses last year. So that region of the world is being devastated by this every single year, worse and worse and worse. And it's only when you see forest fires in Australia or you see parts of California burn that you see a lot of press attention pointing towards it. But these are real people in real parts of the world who are dying right now, losing their houses and changing their livelihood. And I mean, we do have an instigator, right? It's global free market capitalism. If you really want to go down that road, like we know what's causing all of this. It's mindless, rampant consumption and burning of fossil fuels. And we can stop that at any point that we want to. We're just choosing not to do that in a lot of wealthy countries around the world. And our net results across the board are causing these actions and they will become more and more severe. But yeah, the point to remember, this is pretty fucking severe. Like a third of a country flooded is beyond severe. Like it's a point in time that we will look back on and just be horrified by. So I'm glad that you mentioned it.
Cheers. And I mean, we'll keep mentioning it as the recency of it fades and it becomes third or fourth page news, and yet it's still happening. And yeah, I think we'll leave it there, Simon. Plenty of tennis left at the US Open as we get to the business end. We'll be back next week to chat about the winners and the losers. A reminder, we are on patreon.com/open era. Join us there, get the show ad free, get it early on Sundays, which is paramount during tournament time, as we try not to date ourselves too badly, but it happens through no fault of our own. And you get access to the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. Had a great time watching Muguruza Kvitova with our Discord family. So join us there. We're on Twitter @OpenEraPod, tweeting throughout the US Open. And also, if you could be so kind and you love the show and you love what we do, please give us a rating or a review wherever you get this podcast so we can get it into more people's ears. For producer Greg on the ones and twos, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.